They told us the soil was judgment and the sky was mercy, that the earth had fallen under wrath, cursed and unbreathable, and that only the covenant, sanctified and sealed in orbit, preserved us from becoming rot. They built a faith on that lie. Said descent was a punishment, said breath was sacred only when rationed. So when they buried me in the dirt, they expected silence to take root. But mercy doesn't float above. It anchors, it sinks into you and stays. When the retrieval signal pinged from the edge of Sanctum's launch rails and flagged my pod as active, they panicked. I'd been gone too long, no telemetry, no life signs after atmospheric breach. Officially, I was already dead. Cut a Bram, marked deceased, declared soil touched. My return was not a salvation. It was an error in the system. They didn't greet me. No procession, no rite, just drones, sterilizers, and a flashing red file on the intake slate. They stripped me bare, ran me through decontamination cycles until the skin felt flayed. The rust on my prosthetic hand was noted, the damage to my thigh scar recorded. The breath in my lungs flagged as suspect, soil touched. That phrase has weight, not just unclean, contaminant. It means they fear what you carry, not spores, not toxins. Doubt. I should have been gone, lost in a radstorm, slagged by biotech runoff, or devoured in a silence trench. But I came back. The infirmary was a holding pen in all but name. 3 days by my own count, throat wrapped in a respirator clamp, limbs heavy with sedatives that tasted like citrus and metal. A cracked ceramic ceiling above me bore old weld marks like veins. The air didn't feel like air. It was too clean, too filtered. A lie in every breath. Clerics watched from behind one-way glass. I could smell the oil they used on their robes, myrrh and solder. One stayed longer than the rest. A man about my age, but with hands that hadn't dug through soil, skin that hadn't cracked from real sun. Interpreter Pell. He stared like I was a fault line, a living breach. Didn't speak to me the first day, or the second. But on the third, he activated the relay panel beside my bed and recited Vox Codex, Book of Preservation, Breath Line 19. To return unsealed is to carry rupture within. One man's lungs may unmake the hull. I turned to look at him. My throat rasped, dry from days of recycled air and doctrine-laced whispers. You think I'm a crack? He didn't blink, just studied me like I was an anomaly that shouldn't be breathing. Name's not Priest, he said. Interpreter Pell. I'll be evaluating your claim. Evaluation. That meant interrogation without the blood. Clerics like Pell didn't wield weapons. They wielded words. They parsed phrasing, dissected rhythm, hunted heresy in breath patterns. Every answer a test. Every silence a confession. I've got nothing to claim, I said. Just scars and questions. He didn't press, just flexed his fingers behind his back, left eye twitching. He marked the start of the ritual, then walked out. They moved me after that, not to Breather's Row. That section had likely been dismantled or repurposed. Instead, I was assigned to a cell above the drop core. Just surveillance, no bars, no lock. But double-filtered air and a drone with static eyes waiting at the door. The station hadn't changed, not really. The bones of Sanctum were too old, too entrenched, but it felt different. The lights above flickered like doctrine half-remembered. Incense choked the corridors, thick enough to hide the scent of rust and fatigue. Sermon hymns bled through the vents, warped by static. People stared when I passed. One dropped a crate of ration pucks. No one offered a greeting. I saw Mev Hanrich in the mid-deck, a former coil dog handler, jaw still strapped with scrap metal from a coolant fire years back. Her dogs, old constructs with blinking sensor domes and rusted joints, growled low when they saw me. She didn't flinch, just spat through her plate. Can't plug holes with ghosts, Cutter. Go crawl back to dirt. I didn't respond. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't back. I was just here. Risen didn't mean redeemed. It meant disruption. I sat on the edge of the bunk in my new cell and flexed the mechanical digits of my left hand. They clicked like teeth. The ceiling hissed with air cycling, twice filtered, maybe 3 times. They feared what I breathed out. Pell came again, flanked by a scribe with a breath transceiver and a blinking data slate. There's no record of extraction, he said. No descent logs after your telemetry failed. Guess that makes me fiction. He didn't smile. Fiction requires authorship. You've authored nothing. The scribe was dismissed. Pell locked the door behind him, moved closer. You were declared dead, sealed in record. But here you are, breathing changed. I saw life, I said. Not doctrine's wasteland, not the rot they preach. It was different, wild, but alive. He didn't blink, but his fingers twitched again. Behind the calm, the control, something faltered. That is not permitted, he said. No, I replied. It isn't. He ordered me held under observation, scan and sacrament to follow. Told me not to speak, not to move outside assigned bounds. I already broke doctrine, I told him, the moment I stepped off that pod. At night, I wandered. Not far, just enough. I passed Kren Tolve, still sweeping with his glass wire broom, still mute, still devout. He looked up at me once, tapped his broom twice, then returned to his work. Like I was a symbol, not a man. I found a viewport above the drop core. Watched the earth turn below. Not red, not dead, just distant and blue. They told us the surface was ruin. They sealed us in steel and scripture to protect us from it. But I knew the truth now. The lie wasn't that Earth was dangerous. The lie was that nothing survived. They feared the truth not because it would kill them, but because it wouldn't. Because something else still lived down there, and it had let me return. Not to save them. To remind them that breath isn't a gift. It's a choice. The second descent was different. The Covenant called it a sanction, but it was exile wrapped in protocol, a suicide mission in all but name. One pod, one uplink, no promise of return. They didn't expect data. They expected silence. The drop tore through orbit with more violence than the first. Retro systems misfired. The heat shield screamed. I braced against the old harness and counted seconds. When impact came, it cracked the pod's spine and slammed me against the bulkhead, hard enough to blacken my vision. But I lived. Again. The air outside was thick, damp with rot, and laced with something green and old. I stepped out onto Earth that shouldn't have existed. Dense overgrowth bursting through the bones of dead infrastructure. Wild ferns muscled through old concrete. Vines wrapped around skeletal overpasses. The terrain was fractured, but not hostile. It breathed. So did I. My orders were simple: confirm or deny survival systems in the area. But I wasn't looking for power. I was looking for proof. I found the vault by accident. Edge terrain, half swallowed by biotech bloom, and the bones of a ruined transit hub. A signal pulsed faint from a broken antenna nestled in an old checkpoint. I activated the uplink, sent one word back: alive. Then I shut it down. They found me before nightfall. The first figure appeared between the trees, tall, masked, draped in skin and cured fibers, pale ridges along the shoulders like bone grown wrong. Not uniform, not armor, something else. Behind them, more moved, low, four-limbed shapes that crawled and clicked. I didn't run. I knew better. They didn't speak. They watched. One stepped forward, tilted its head and raised a hand, warning or welcome, I couldn't tell. Then something struck me hard. A club, blunt and precise. The world blinked out in white and then black. I woke in a place that felt like myth. Bone rafters arched overhead, polished by weather and time. A fire smoldered in the center of the chamber, its smoke curling through a carved shaft above. The walls were reinforced with salvaged metal pylons fused with resin. Around the edges, strange symbols had been etched, some familiar in shape, others impossibly foreign. 3 figures watched me, silent. One tall, staff in hand, one wrapped in cloth, face scarred in ritual lines. One small, too small to be dangerous, but more alert than the others. I didn't move. The pain behind my eye throbbed where they'd struck me. Then the tall one approached, unhurried. He knelt, pulled something from a tanned hide pouch and set it beside me. A knot of dried root. Food. He mimed chewing. I obeyed. Bitter, rubbery, but real. He watched, then stood, turned, and left. They were testing me. Time shifted. No clocks, no sermons. Just cycles. Smoke burned low, basins cleaned, guards rotated at the outer pylons. The vault, I realized, was one of the old biotech testing zones, subterranean, pre-fall. They hadn't just found it. They'd made it home, made it theirs. No locks, no guards, no chains. I wasn't kept. I was observed. They never spoke in language as I knew it, but there was rhythm, breath, posture, gestures that formed a grammar I could feel even if I couldn't translate. Silence held weight. Stillness was a response. On the 4th smoke cycle, I met the one who struck me. A broad-shouldered figure crouched across the fire from me, fossil jaw mask permanently grinning. His eyes were amber, steady. He mimicked my posture, then tapped his chest twice and drew a spiral in the dirt. A mark, a name, a meaning. Tarn, I said aloud. He didn't correct me, just watched. I returned the gesture, tapped my own chest. Bram. That was the first ritual, the beginning of understanding. I watched their ceremonies. Burial meant planting. A body laid with a fungal sac in the chest, roots threading into the cavity. Death became soil. Soil became memory. Tarn never wept, but I saw the way he breathed shorter when an elder collapsed near the fire. The tribe gathered in silence, placed stones around the body in a spiral, and walked away as the fungus took root. Later, Tarn gave me a shard of metal etched with that same spiral, placed it in my palm, a gift, a mark, a recognition. They were not animals, not machines. They were descended, survivors of a world that changed and chose not to die. Their scars were ritual, not remnants. Their silence was chosen, not forced. The Wound Watcher came on the 8th sleep, a woman bent with age but precise in motion. She placed a stone bowl before me, traced a line along my collarbone, and exhaled mist from her lips. Not anointing. Permission. She judged pain, sealed it, marked it in breath. Then Tarn offered me a satchel, travel supplies, root paste, copper wire, cloth patterned with burnt holes. A way out. I realized then. I wasn't a prisoner. I was a candidate. We climbed through a narrow shaft, a maintenance tunnel half collapsed and marked with glyphs. Roots swayed in the cracks. Light shimmered above, filtered through a ruined canopy. We emerged into a corridor swallowed by green. Old signs rusted to nothing. Spiral marks burned into the walls. Tarn waited. No words, no urging. He was offering a choice. Behind me, the vault breathed. Alive. Finished with me, for now. I stepped forward, and Tarn followed. Sanctum hadn't changed. Same hiss from the docking clamps, same recycled breath sliding down sterilized corridors, same smell of filtered memory, antiseptic, grease, and fear. But it wasn't the same me that stepped out of the pod, and Tarn wasn't something they could explain away. He stood beside me as the hatch opened, mask tucked at his hip, eyes calm, watchful, not afraid, not challenging, just present. That alone was enough to shake the edges of their world. The technicians who met us didn't speak. One dropped a calibration spike when she saw him. It clattered against the deck and spun like it was choosing a direction. No one picked it up. 4 oxyguards followed. They came armed with respirator lances and doctrine authority, but none of them pointed a weapon. They stared, not at me, at him. I said, "You'll want a cleric." They didn't argue. Pell came eventually, same posture, same clipped tone, but something in his eyes was different. Not uncertainty, not yet, but the hairline crack before a fracture. "You returned again." I brought proof. The pod's data was already uploading. Uplink footage, atmospheric reads, rituals, firelight, spirals drawn in ash and blood, Tarn burying the dead. Pell didn't touch the console, didn't need to. He watched Tarn through the mesh. Was it a tribe? Yes. Living, thinking, choosing. You told us the Earth was rot, that it had no memory but death. You were wrong. He closed his eyes. Brief. A blink slowed by weight. This man, Tarn, what is he? Not yours to define. He flinched at that, just slightly, as if the truth might be contagious. They locked us in separate containment, but no interrogator came. No trial, just silence stretched too long. The footage slipped through the lower decks like a pressure leak. No one announced it. No one had to. Spirals began appearing, not just on walls, on ration slips, on worn sleeves, on duct panels in crawl spaces. People who had never seen soil now whispered about firelight and breath beyond law. Something had broken, and the Covenant responded the only way it knew how. They came at shift change, robes stripped, faces masked, no names, pulled me from the cell. Tarn, too, wrists bound, not struggling. They didn't use the containment hood. Maybe they feared what seeing his face would do. They didn't say exile. They said permanent soil return. We were marched down to the launch bay, cargo pod. No guidance system, just rusted steel and a ration box bolted to the floor. Inside, 30 of us. Some I recognized. Others were strangers with the same look in their eyes, the look of people who had seen something, or worse, believed someone who had. They sealed the hatch without speaking. The clamps released, the pod dropped. There was no grace in the descent, no hymns, just gravity and silence. When the hatch blew open, the air that hit us wasn't clean, but it was real. Moss, rain-wet sediment, the sweet, sharp burn of survival. Tarn moved first, unbound, unbent. He walked without hesitation, like he knew where to go. Most followed. A few hesitated, waiting for doctrine to call them back. It never did. We crossed the wilds, past drone husks and crumbling towers wrapped in thorn vine, past pools where biotech runoff shimmered in impossible hues. 2 collapsed. 1 didn't get up. We kept moving. By dusk, we reached the vault. The pylon spirals were fresh. The fire was burning. Figures emerged from shadow, not to challenge, to see. A child approached one of the exiles, extended a hand. No test, no question, just space made. We were not invaders. We were returning. The days blurred. We built shelters from scrap and vine, learned the rhythms, the food, the silence. Some broke, some vanished, some began to understand. I became translator. Not of words, of posture, of ritual. The fire held, the breath deepened. One night I drew a spiral in the dirt, a mark for Sanctum, a closed system, a lie sealed in steel. Tarn knelt beside me, drew another line, a loop, a fracture. He nodded once. No need to say more. Above us, Sanctum passed across the sky, a pin of dying light. And then we saw something fall, a streak, a flare. A pod, maybe. Or wreckage. We didn't flinch. We'd already landed. We'd already chosen. No one was coming to save us, and we didn't need them to, because the breach wasn't the descent. It was the truth we carried back up with us, and the world above was already cracked. Now it would have to listen.